My name is Rebecca Zach, and I'm an artist, researcher, teacher. I've been an art teacher at the middle school level for the past 7 years, and a PhD candidate for 3 years. And an artist? I think, like my friend Emma, we're all artists from a very young age. But as Picasso once said, the trouble is how to remain an artist once we grow up. It's a really important question.
We've all agreed, nonetheless, on the extraordinary capacities that children have. And my contention is all kids have tremendous talents, and we squander them pretty ruthlessly. The result is that we are educating people out of their creative capacities.
What a scary thought. Researchers define creativity in slightly different ways, but the common thread is that it involves developing something unique and novel and relevant and useful.
The process of having original ideas that have value.
So considering we live in a world today marked by things like rapid technological innovation, social media, shifting global economic powers, overpopulation, climate change, student disengagement, etc., it's arguably now more important than ever that we determine how to best foster creative capacities, not squash them. We need unique, novel, relevant, useful solutions to address problems and to capitalize on opportunities moving forward.
The abilities that now matter most are abilities that are characteristic of the right hemisphere. Artistry, empathy, inventiveness, big picture thinking. Those kinds of abilities have become really the first among equals in a whole range of businesses, a whole range of professions.
Creativity is our new economy. And it's something we have to harness, we have to cultivate, we have to take great care of.
Businesses cannot succeed, especially under modern competitive conditions. They cannot succeed without innovation. And innovation depends on creativity.
It's education that's meant to take us into this future that we can't grasp. Nobody has a clue what the world will look like in 5 years' time. And yet we're meant to be educating them for it.
What we need is not for the arts to look more like the academics, but for the academics to look more like the arts.
So, like Picasso, my big question is, how can we nurture creativity in education? Creativity is a human characteristic, although some of us don't recognize ourselves as being creative. I know from experience in the classroom and in my studio that creativity is fragile. There are certain conditions that help make creativity possible, and there are conditions that do the opposite. I've been party to both, constructing and obstructing opportunities for creativity over the years. But a lot of it was not directly my fault. A lot of it was systemic. So when asking how we can nurture creativity in education, I want to know how other educational models are set up, how they prepare or impair creativity, and how this can inform change going forward. I went to a mainstream school, so I am in part a product of the mainstream system. I work in the mainstream system now, and what I don't want to do is perpetuate the status quo if the status quo is outdated and doesn't make sense. I think that's the responsibility of every teacher. We all aim to do better as we grow as teachers. This is an area that I've identified based on who I am and my area of practice that I want to investigate further. For Emma's sake, for my own kids one day, and for everyone's sake. I see myself as a child advocate, so in my practice as an artist, researcher, teacher, I confront the politics of education to give voice to issues that affect kids. And for me, voice is something that's best transmitted through the visual image and disseminated online. Art's an amazing vehicle for inquiry, for asking questions, for connecting us to ideas through emotions, and for uncovering understanding. It alters perspectives, it transforms minds and hearts, it makes change. Art is the best agent of change. There's a range of actions we all take when developing a unique, novel, valuable idea. It's called the creative process. Although there are lots of ways to conceptualize it, it basically involves 4 periods. A period of gathering information and inspiration to work with, a period of incubation where ideas and thoughts begin to form, a production period where you start to work with your materials, and a critique period to evaluate next steps. These periods don't necessarily follow a particular order or occur in any kind of pattern, and they're not time-bound either. It all depends on the project. Sometimes it's necessary to stay at one period for a long time before moving on to another, and sometimes you have to revisit the same period again and again before you're satisfied, before you figure out how to solve the problem at hand. Essentially, that's what the creative process is, an exercise in problem solving guided by imagination.
Imagination is a process of creating what is not, but which could be.
Implicit in the creative process is the element of discovery, be it small or significant. Discoveries made through creative problem solving might matter on just a personal level, or it could apply to the broader population, as in research.
Discovery. In dealing with the problem, you very often come upon outcomes, images, or ideas that emerge that were not anticipated at the outset, but nevertheless are filled with promise. And so you pursue the promise. You pursue the surprise.
In the 1960s, Bruner developed his theory of discovery learning, which said that learning was more memorable and effective when someone could come to conclusions on their own, rather than by just being told directly. Though there are many variations in practice, ultimately the intention is to have students actively engaged in their learning, rather than be relegated as passive recipients of knowledge. Learning is more enjoyable and meaningful this way. Brazilian educator Paulo Freire advocated for this approach as well. He said, whereas banking or passive education anesthetizes and inhibits creative power, problem-posing education, where the outcome isn't known or anticipated, strives for the emergence of consciousness and critical intervention in reality.
If I think about what have I learned in my life, it's from my own projects, not from formal learning. Learning's a byproduct, and that's really the best way for children to learn.
It's not just a theory or an idea. We now have scientific evidence that learning through discovery really works.
fMRI show that we receive some of our highest dopamine doses during the discovery phase of learning. The exact aha moment has a chemical analog. You get surprised, you get a little jolt to your learning center so you'll remember what surprised you. So to simplify, we like learning, we like surprises, and we really like learning that surprises us.
It doesn't take a certain type of individual to be able to be creative. Anyone can problem solve and discover solutions if they're willing to spend the time.
Creativity is an operational idea. You can plan for it and make it happen systematically.
When we study people who are really good at something, they all seem to require 10,000 hours of practice before they got good, and that's 10 years, basically 4 hours a day for 10 years.
Cognitive psychologists now tell us that talent is not something inborn, but rather, when we repeatedly do something we enjoy, it's linked to physiological changes that actually change and shape us over time.
When you're engaging in a form of creativity that really excites you and really attracts you, that intrinsic motivation is related to brain and hormonal changes.
By and large, it's our experience that shapes our ability. So viewed from that angle, it's easy to see how important it is that creativity be embedded in every aspect of learning. Every field imaginable uses the creative process to advance without exception. So those who are mentally equipped to meet and address the challenges brought forth in the future, people who can think critically and divergently, who can problem solve and stick with it come what may, will be in high demand. Because ultimately, creative output rewards us all.
You know, most of the jobs in the world today didn't exist 50 years ago. So what we really need to teach kids to do is how to learn and how to have a passion for learning new things.
Learning is easy to come by when it's interest-based. When someone is really into something, they're intrinsically motivated to keep pursuing it. And even when challenges arise, if you have the skills needed to tackle them and problem solve, then intrinsic motivation is at its peak. This is what Csikszentmihalyi calls being in flow. It's a phenomenon where a person feels mentally transported, their senses are awakened, and the motivation to work seems limitless because the work seems worthwhile for its own sake.
When you are really involved in this completely engaging process of creating something new, as this man does, he doesn't have enough attention left over to monitor how his body feels or his problems at home. He can't feel even that he's hungry or tired. His body disappears, his identity disappears from his consciousness because he doesn't have enough attention, like none of us do, to really do well something that requires a lot of concentration and at the same time to feel that he exists. So existence temporarily suspended.
In flow, engagement is not just a given, it's practically unbreakable. Now imagine if education looked like this all the time.
The secret to high performance isn't rewards and punishments, but that unseen intrinsic drive, the drive to do things for their own sake because they matter. Those if-then rewards often destroy creativity.
A task needs to be challenging for flow to take place. Passive regurgitation and activities that follow a formula don't activate the mind enough.
You know, recipes are excellent tools for teaching skills, and they form a great context for that, but they're limited in their ability to promote innovation except when you're forced to deviate.
Bloom's taxonomy classifies thinking skills from lowest and simplest to highest and most complex. And when it was recently revised, creativity was granted a spot at the top of the list because it takes all of these other ways of thinking to produce something new and useful. Creativity is incredibly mentally comprehensive, and yet,
every education system on Earth has the same hierarchy of subjects. At the top are mathematics and languages, then the humanities, and the bottom are the arts. We need to radically rethink our view of intelligence. It's diverse. We think about the world in all the ways that we experience it. We think visually, we think in sound, we think kinesthetically, we think in abstract terms, we think in movement.
learning through creativity caters to visual and kinesthetic learners, offering them another realm to explore and communicate what they know. And it's always individualized because everyone thinks differently and will produce something unique that only they could produce.
Human life thrives on diversity, and our education systems are modeled on the principle of conformity.
The arts teach children that problems can have more than one solution, that questions can have more than one answer. There's so much that we teach in school which is essentially convergent in character, where there is a right answer. Life is not that way.
The great goal of any education system, ideally, is that we come to an understanding of ourselves, individually and communally. Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs illustrates how human needs are ordered and dependent on each other. It shows that once our physiological and emotional needs are met, the height of all needs is self-actualization, to know who we are and be all we can be. Self-actualized people are complete, satisfied people, and one way we achieve this is through creativity.
So part of the task of education is to connect ourselves with ourselves. But the other great task is to connect with each other through the power of empathy. And all those things get lost in an industrialized, homogenized, atomized system of education. And the price couldn't be higher. And we're paying it every day in disaffection, disengagement, and emotional turmoil.
For all these reasons, it's very understandable why Eisner believes the goal of education should be to produce artists, people who do whatever they do very well for the love of it.
In the end, the aim of education can be thought of as the creation of artists. Not artists as painters necessarily, but artists as you fill in the box.
And why Sir Ken Robinson says,
creativity now is as important in education as literacy, and we should treat it with the same status.
And why Green says,
I believe that if you can encourage imagination, a lot of children would do better.
And why Csikszentmihalyi says,
Art should be a revitalizing part of everyday life for everyone, something that leads us to a better world.
And yet for most students, their schooling experience is still so far from this.
The studies, which have looked at 300,000 American school children over a 35-year period, have found that since 1990, creative thinking skills have been in sharp decline.
Our education system has mined our minds in the way that we strip mine the earth for a particular commodity, and for the future, it won't serve us.
What worries me about schools is boring, it's dull.
School is a habit training mechanism.
I think school is absolutely devastating to the culture.
School is not just like prison, it is prison.
The worst kind of education is the most popular.
So if creativity is so important, and yet mainstream schooling is deficient in this respect, it begs the question, how do other educational models account for creativity?
We have to rethink the fundamental principles on which we're educating our children. The only way we'll do it is by seeing our creative capacities for the richness they are, and seeing our children for the hope that they are.
We have to, right now, grab the opportunity to redefine the intellectual mission of the PhD as a project. The quality, extension, and liveliness of our scholarly conversations and our relationship with various publics depends on this redefinition.
Raising Creativity is a documentary film project that is my PhD dissertation. In attempting to answer the question, how can we nurture creativity in education, I've pulled together the traditional components of a doctoral dissertation in non-traditional ways, through a series of 5 YouTube videos and a blog. Each video represents a new chapter, and the blog extends to the discussion from the videos wherever necessary. As an art teacher researching creativity, it only makes sense that my research method would demonstrate creativity as well. Working this way frees me from the limitations of a text document while allowing me to capitalize on the amazing tools and technology we have today. Many academics are already using online video in presenting paper abstracts because of what this medium can offer that others can't.
These video abstracts grew out of the realization that the internet allows us to communicate with each other in ways that were never before possible. Therefore, it allows us to personalize our papers in ways that were never before possible. Use these video abstracts creatively.
Artography and arts-informed research are the 2 methodologies that are guiding my research. First, artography is a method of inquiry for people like me who make art, investigate issues related to their practice, and teach art. It recognizes these 3 roles as one, because after all, our experience and expertise in one respect easily translates as knowledge and capacity in the other 2, in ways that wouldn't be possible otherwise. For example, when I'm painting, the things I learn by being engaged in the creative process inevitably help and inspire me in my teaching and in my academic pursuits. And it works the same from the other 2 angles. I like to picture it this way. Let's say these primary colors represent the artist, the researcher, and the teacher. When these roles come together, you don't get a pure blue, red, or yellow anymore. You get a completely new color, a completely unique identity unto itself. This is the perspective I'm coming from in my research. Next, arts-informed research is grounded in qualitative theory, but not bound by tradition. Meaning, it's research that keeps an academic lens while embracing what alternative formats like video have to offer. In this case, I've chosen unschooling theory to provide the base upon which this dissertation will take shape. This means that the film is informed by scholarly arguments that mainstream schooling is deficient as is. No matter what theoretical framework is chosen to support arts-informed research, the basic tenets of this methodology remain the same. They are accessibility, pluralism, researcher presence, and empathy. Here's how my work conforms to these. First, accessibility.
About the importance of working with doctoral students so that they understand themselves as speaking to multiple audiences, and of translating scholarship to larger publics and developing modes of public scholarship. Because creativity in education is something that affects everyone, not just university scholars,
It's very important to me that my research be made readily available to everyone, especially since grassroots movements such as Unschooling begin with the general public. By making my research available in an open access format, that is, online on YouTube, the opportunity for distribution is wide open thanks to social media platforms that encourage sharing. In contrast, traditional dissertations and journals can usually only be read in university libraries or through institutions that have a subscription. Mass exposure is how this research can have its best chance at making a difference. Another advantage to presenting my work online is that it's more accessible in terms of its understandability, given that there's the visual and auditory realm to accompany what's being said.
Writing actually gives you merely a partial account of what is going on. It's like having sentences which aren't completed. And if you say, well, I'm only interested in writing, what you've really done is you've made it impossible for yourself to really answer the question which is being asked by your PhD.
Video allows me to layer all sorts of still and animated visuals, music, sound effects, and text together. Not to mention body language, expression, and intonation to produce a kind of super communication that makes things easier to understand and more captivating for you as the audience. The next tenet in arts-informed research is pluralism, recognizing that there's no one absolute truth and respecting diversity of opinion. Anything based in the arts is by nature non-conclusive. It requires interpretation.
Even though you and I are looking at the same object in the world, we're creating slightly different visual impressions in our mind, emotional impressions in our mind. When you look at a painting, you're undergoing a creative experience similar to the painter and reconstructing in a way that is unique for you and slightly different for me.
And that's precisely how participatory culture works. We throw ideas out into the world, we bring them back in an improved way because of our engagement with communities.
Art-based researchers see the non-definitiveness of their work as a real strength. It prompts you to make up your own mind about what's presented based on your understanding and experiences. Because truly, what's more personally reliable and trustworthy than that? My goal in raising creativity isn't to prescribe what others should think, but instead to present informed ideas for personal interpretation on the aspects of various educational models that best nurture creativity, and to provoke discussion to that end.
Great works are great because they're ambiguous. They allow for alternative readings.
In order to showcase these models, I'm accessing the collective intelligence of YouTube for videos from the general public, then remixing these clips together to satisfy my research question.
Where the group as a whole can put together knowledge in a more complex way than any individual member is capable of doing.
By remixing YouTube videos, it means that the voices of many diverse people can be represented in my research so as to adequately address the topic and thereby bring new understanding to light.
As average people develop the ability to tell their stories, we're seeing different perspectives emerge. We're seeing different groups gain representation. We're seeing groups challenge the dominant media images that have been constructed for their lives.
Because new media outlets like YouTube are participatory, they're shifting the way we communicate and learn, and in turn, our behavior. The resources we now use to consume information also give us the opportunity to interact with that information and produce our own information. Jenkins calls this convergence culture.
Is a world where we take control of the media as it enters our lives.
These are prime conditions for Freire's problem-posing approach to learning. After viewing Raising Creativity, you're invited into the discussion to offer your feedback on the topic. Not only does participation from the audience respect pluralism, it also constitutes the critique phase of the creative process, a necessary step towards refinement and progress. The understanding that people can take from this research will continue to be refined as long as participation and engagement continues, evolving with collective intelligence over time. Next, arts-informed research acknowledges the researcher's presence, which means that this work naturally has a subjective side to it. After all, it's impossible to make art without the artist being reflected in it. And not only is that okay, it's an advantage. If research is to strike a chord with people, it must appeal to the personal rather than to generalizations, facts, and statistics. Eisner writes, "Research with no coherent story, no vivid images, and no sense of the particular is unlikely to stick. Artistic formats offer us a narrative that helps us to make sense of what would otherwise be incoherent complexity."
People live and tell stories. That's our way of thinking about experience. That's really an important piece that's often missing in the research.
It's for these reasons I've chosen to appear in this film, to connect with you and to contextualize the theory around my artist, researcher, teacher narrative. Ultimately, this kind of research aims to promote social justice and positive change by evoking a sense of empathy.
The ability to put yourself in somebody else's position and to imagine what that might be like.
As a classroom teacher, I recognize the negative effects that bureaucratic policy has on children, wherein education is something done to them, not with them. Students in mainstream schooling are seldom offered a say in how their learning experience will unfold.
When a school or a family or a culture or a community define the opportunities children have to learn, they're also defining the kind of minds that children can come to own. In a certain sense, you can think about the curriculum as a mind-altering device.
Children are intelligent, passionate individuals with preferences and aptitudes that are uniquely their own. However, they remain at the mercy of those who are more powerful, which is why they need advocates in their corner to help them say their piece.
Children are the last acceptably oppressed group within the world we live in.
And the challenge for those of us caring about social justice issues is to make sure that those people who have been the most oppressed and most dispossessed get their stories in the circulation. As we expand who has the power to tell stories, we have the potential for stories to grab our imagination, to touch our hearts.
We have evolved this powerful sense of imagination. What happens in all times of conflict and cruelty is we shut empathy off so that we can do things that are unimaginable. And the way we avoid that is by kindling our imaginations and making those things unimaginable in turn.
I'm inspired by Maxine Greene, who believes that the duty of education is to help students nurture their personal talents for the purpose of contributing to society and making a better, more democratic world. And I think educational research should play a role in helping to fulfill this mission. With Raising Creativity, I hope to raise awareness and spark action around the ways in which mainstream schooling must improve, as well as draw attention to the alternatives that are out there that can inform such change, or in fact, be the change. It's too important to ignore, too timely to wait, too personal to not get involved. Thankfully, there's no shortage of video clips to pull from. In fact, there's so much content available that I can't possibly scour every video related to my topic. There's just too many. This question, how can we nurture creativity in education, is a big one. So in order to help guide my YouTube search, I've broken it down into 3 sub-questions that focus on the conditions under which creativity can thrive.
Creativity is an operational idea. You can plan for it systematically. You cannot predict the outcome of human development. All you can do is, like a farmer, create the conditions under which they will begin to flourish.
So what kind of conditions are conducive to creativity? Well, according to my observations as an artist, researcher, teacher, and according to the literature, for creativity to flourish, people need to be autonomous, they need support, and they need to not be judged. Really, these areas are interdependent. Depending on how well these conditions are met determines how well the opportunity for creativity is maximized. I'll address these one at a time, looking at YouTube videos to shed light on how educational models from across the spectrum either nurture or neglect each condition. Specifically, I'm looking into unschooling, homeschooling, Sudbury Valley free schools, Montessori schools, Waldorf schools, as well as alternatives within mainstream schooling and mainstream schooling itself. First, autonomy.
The urge to direct our own lives.
How and to what extent are learners able to control what they do, as well as control when and how long they pursue an activity? In other words, who's in the driver's seat? Who decides where to go and for what length of time?
Process that makes children stupid, at least stupid in school, is other people trying to control their learning.
We have to recognize that education is personal, that people pull away from it or just disengage.
The best leaders understand that people need to have their time protected. They need to have the space in which they can have sustained acts of creativity, and they need it every day.
Hundreds of scientific investigations that have shown when you're autonomously motivated, your behavior will be more creative.
Unschooling is an educational philosophy that is under the subcategory of homeschooling, where people aren't really forced to do any schoolwork or take any tests that they don't want to. It's child-led, self-expressive, learn about what you want, when you want to. It's really cool.
Where homeschooling could mean school at home, where you're taking the same principles and applications used in school and just bringing them home, unschooling is more not school.
They allow their children to set their own educational pace. So they don't force them to learn anything. The children get to learn whatever they feel like they should learn. Okay, so basically it's giving all the power to the child when it comes to their education.
Zoe and Tegan are their own teachers.
I get to learn whatever I want, whenever I want. Just because you're not in school learning doesn't mean that you're not learning at all.
Have you ever met anyone who isn't interested in something? Have you ever met someone who isn't capable of learning? We like to learn. We are good at it. We don't need to be shown how or made to do it.
They're just engaged at all times, questioning, interested and curious and doing and moving, asking and meeting and grabbing new things and building things and creating.
Unschooling is life learning. It's learning from everything around us, from people, from places. We go to museums, we take classes. The longer you unschool, the more you realize that learning is happening all the time.
Children can continue to explore the world in the ways that are most interesting and productive for them. Let the child make the curriculum.
Children know what to do. My young children create a more rigorous curriculum for themselves than any schooling environment can ever produce, just by living their lives and doing things every day.
I hack my education. I take advantage of opportunities in my community and through a network of my friends and family. It's like a remix or a mashup of learning. It's a mindset, not a system. Once you're motivated to learn something, you can get a lot done in a short amount of time and on your own. It's flexible, opportunistic, and it never loses sight of making happy, healthy, and creativity a priority.
Children will learn to do what they want to learn to do.
Learning is like breathing. It's just part of life, and it's going to happen. You can't stop it.
What I was doing as a teacher, where I was throwing information at them, and a lot of it wasn't sticking because there wasn't an interest in the children to begin with. I was teaching what I had to teach them.
You're in control. You learn so much more. You learn so much more than being in some machine that's set up for you to do this or set up for you to do that. You actually learn to be yourself.
Unschooling is about choosing the direction of your learning. So I chose to go and take a class on biology. I chose to take violin classes and dance classes to learn those. Still unschooling.
With a keen interest in freedom and liberty, that children should be granted those same rights.
Homeschool is basically described that you do your school at home.
There's such a variety of diversity with home education. Different values, different belief systems, and also different interests.
Parent-directed education made good sense as an alternative to us.
Choose a curriculum. Figure out what teaching materials you need to purchase. Though flexibility is one of the advantages of homeschooling, you should still have a general idea of how you will fit teaching and schoolwork into the household routine.
For 5-year-old Julian, that's right, and his 7-year-old brother Brennan, a routine school day involves a seat at the kitchen table and lessons from mom or dad.
She leaves the plan of what they need to do, the work, and I'll sit with them to do it.
We'd have a scheduled routine. We would get up, we would read in the morning, then we'd go and do our chores, we'd eat breakfast, and then we'd start school. We did school till about lunch, and then we would take a break for lunch, and then we'd do the rest of our school throughout the day, like stuff we didn't meet my mom for. We called it homework, even though it was all at home.
English, Algebra 2,
History,
Math, Chemistry,
Art,
Bible,
World Religion,
American History,
Geography.
Most of my schoolwork is on my computer, a lot of which I can do independently. It may seem weird for some people to have to learn without a teacher present, but a big part of homeschooling, in my opinion, is learning how to be self-taught, meaning I'm responsible for making sure I'm learning the material. My math course, for example, is 1 part lecture and 1 part interactive equations. And my philosophy class is taught in a virtual classroom with students from all around the country.
Homeschooling through the internet, they will have also a lecturer to do video lectures that the young people can watch at their own speed. And it's going to be designed to get people to read. It's going to be designed to people write. It's going to be designed to think about businesses and how to interact. So I'm very encouraged by this, and hopefully we can participate in this transition away from the disaster that's happening in our public school system.
Schools in which you don't have to go to classes unless you want to, and you could choose any class to go to. The decisions are made democratically. What these schools and programs have in common is that they are learner-centered and empower the students.
School meeting is extremely important because it's basically what runs the school. Everything is decided in the school meeting. School meeting is the authority.
Everyone that comes to the school is a school meeting member. Everyone has an equal vote. And I feel like the community of the school really teaches kids that they're just as equal as any other person here.
This is a school really run by the kids, because the kids always would outvote the staff if there were really any philosophical or political differences between the staff and the students. Children do what they want to do, and mostly, if you look at it, you wouldn't be surprised to see that what they're primarily doing, little kids are primarily playing. But if you look at the play, and if you look at what they're doing closely, what you see is very sophisticated activity. The play is complex. It's exercising higher mental functions all the time.
The kids at Fairhaven, what they're able to do is when they really want something to happen, it's really on them to make it. Every problem and good thing at Fairhaven is the kids do it.
To be free while at the same time realizing that there are restrictions you must put on yourself.
It's the hardest school to be in, and you ask the kids and they'll tell you it's the hardest school to be in.
Why?
Because if you're told what to do all day, it's like taking care of you all day, right? You don't have to make decisions. Here, a kid has to make decisions, but they go through all the ups and downs of mistakes, of learning from mistakes, of falling on their faces, picking themselves up again. So they have to prioritize their time, and they have to sit and say, well, what is that I really want to do? They have to really find out who they are.
The school gave me the gift of time to let my own interests rise to the surface. Any creative effort, perhaps any effort at all, requires a great deal of thought, gift of time to relax, to have those things come to the surface that were there. It gave us time for reflection, for the introspection that you need to really develop your own creativity.
The Google guys don't credit their success to drive or brains. They say it was nursery school.
We both went to Montessori school, and I think it was part of that training of not following rules and orders and being self-motivated, questioning what's going on in the world, doing things a little bit different.
She established a revolutionary philosophy that children are inherently independent learners.
Learning through doing is really key to how the Montessori approach works.
They're encouraged to ask questions and think outside the box instead of memorizing and regurgitating facts that are placed in front of them. Now, a key element in fostering this love of learning is what we like to call an uninterrupted work cycle, where the day's not chopped up, and instead, these children are able and allow the developmental freedom to focus and concentrate on one area of study as long as they want.
Montessori schools stoke that flame by promoting hands-on, self-paced, collaborative, challenging, and joyful learning. They encourage divergent thinking instead of convergent thinking, innovation instead of standardization. The teacher does not stand at the front delivering the same information to 30 children while trying to keep all of them on the same page. Children in Montessori follow their interests wherever that passion leads, however quickly it leads them, regardless of what other students in the class are working on.
In Waldorf education, the teachers are part of the administration, and they have really the sole and predominant voice in how the curriculum is developed in the school. And that's what's really wonderful about it, is that there isn't this large overarching authority that tells you exactly what you must do and how you must present the curriculum.
The teachers are involved in the pedagogical decisions.
Parents are responsible for the running of the school, and the sustainability of the school makes it very much a community-based school system.
The curriculum is designed to meet the child at each stage of development.
The class teacher walks a path of discovery with the children and guides them into an understanding of the world of meaning, rather than the world of cause and effect.
As they get older, they become more interested in doing what you want them to do because of their love for what they're being taught.
Rather than presenting theories that have to be memorized and then examples given, the attempt is to provide experiences and let the children enjoy and relish what they're doing, and then they come to the ideas and some of the theories themselves.
So all this curriculum is all in order to allow them to become who they truly are in a free sort of way, not what I think they should be or what you think they should be.
Philosophically, where we started, the idea was very personal. You could sit around the table and have more like a seminar.
We put a lot of effort in trying to kind of negotiate things back and forth, students with teachers, teachers with students, whether it be at all school meetings or whatever it is. It's very democratic that way.
Here at Alpha 2, you get to learn your own way. Whether you want to work on the computer, with friends, in the community, whatever you want.
You still have to cover the ministry curriculum, but it's the way in which you deliver the content that matters. So it's the process more than content.
Okay.
So we do cover all grade expectations as prescribed by the ministry curriculum.
One of the primary disadvantages of alternative schools is that the learning is self-paced. The learning is up to the learner. And so there aren't really a lot of external factors to drive motivation in the learner. They need to do it on their own.
If schools is deeply committed against freedom, deeply committed to the idea that children won't do anything good unless somebody makes them.
While you're in school, you have very, very little control of what you're doing. You're being directed pretty much every minute of the day. The rules are very strict about what you can and cannot do. The children are not free in school. People crave freedom, and that's as true of children as it is of people at any age. And when you restrict them in these severe ways, they're not happy. And this is not the kinds of conditions conducive to learning.
Unfortunately, that kind of exuberant interest in learning gets pretty much damped down once the information is being processed for them through an institution like school. In school, the learning becomes something very different from what organically, naturally children love to do, which is to learn. They are not in control of their process. They can't follow their interests.
Their imagination and their creativity is held captive by those who are within the context of the schooling environment. Whoever is in charge tells them what the curriculum is that they're supposed to be learning. So all of these things together combine to make a very oppressive culture.
I have to learn things that I will never, ever, ever, ever use in my life. For example, when am I ever going to be walking down a grocery store and have to be like, oh look, That soup can is a cylinder. I need to find the circumference. I need to find the radius. I need to find the surface area. You know what? I need to find the volume before I get this. I need to do all this crazy stuff that I learned in geometry to buy soup, right? Wrong.
You have one person at the front telling all the people who aren't in the front what to think and what to understand and how to think about things. And I don't think that really works in terms of teaching eloquence and teaching real knowledge.
Something gets violated when you force yourself, really, to learn things that you don't even want to learn.
Kids are told to read textbooks, they're forced to fill out worksheets. Kids literally get arrested and get thrown into this Alcatraz-like system. I mean, if you look at prisons and schools, they're pretty similar. I mean, in prison and school, you're basically told what to do all day. Your bells dictate your schedule. Attendance is compulsory, and you're really cut off from society. So there are a number of very similar things.
I feel like kids that go to school are like prisoners. They're prisoners in their own life.
By a reasonable definition of prison, school is not just like prison, it is prison.
I make kids work harder than they ever thought they could. No, you cannot work in groups. No, you can't ask a question. So put your hand down. Why won't I let you go to the bathroom? Because you're bored and you don't really have to go, do you?
What's taught in our classrooms needs to be far more reflective of the kids that come into the classroom. You would have to say school has not made an effort or has not connected to them in a way that makes them feel that they can engage with what's going on.
When I started teaching, I could see the disengagement happening more and more, and kids just, why do we have to learn about this? And I said, well, because I say you have to learn about it. I totally flipped everything. I'll post the classwork for that day. But then after that, they're on their own. I do have kids, though, that like to go find their own stuff. So they'll start with mine, but then they'll go off and say, here, Mr. Bennett, here's another example on how this works. This is a cool website I found. It gives them individuality.
The next condition to consider is support. How and to what extent are learners provided support for creativity? Support can mean direct teaching, if that's what's asked for specifically, or it may mean precisely the opposite, leaving someone alone. Support spans from the unsolicited, like offering encouragement and trust, to the solicited, as in providing the appropriate materials, environment, feedback, and instruction as asked for.
We found that when people had more positive emotions on one day, they were more likely to have creative ideas that day. And not only that, they were more likely to have creative ideas the following day.
It's not a matter of saying, well, this is what you're going to do today, this is how you're going to do it, this is how I'm going to test you, but a matter of bringing them into the situation, an incredible appetizer for fantasy and play. And once that takes over, then the kids, they will have a million ideas.
Unschooling is based on trusting a child that they will learn and that they have an innate desire to learn.
The French philosopher Rousseau proposed that basically adults should set up the environment and stay out of the way, that the child has within him or her the capacity to learn, and the adult's job was to set up the environment so that they could sort of explore things.
We talk far too much. We interfere with their processes far too much as adults. So to just shut up a little bit more, which does not mean laissez-faire. It does not mean that you just let them go. You let them explore their in their own path and come to their own conclusions. You see, you give them freedom to do that. You're on an eye-to-eye level, honoring their processes, supporting them.
The family will have books, records, tools, depending on the kinds of things they're interested in, the kinds of things they do. But whatever the parents do, their life is accessible to the children. The children aren't locked in the house. The parents take them where they go. They're taken seriously as people. They're talked to. Their concerns are listened to. When their parents meet with other adults, they are admitted to the world. I mean, they're treated the way children were treated before modern childhood was invented. They're simply a part of the world that their parents live in. And as I say, they ask questions, they get interested in things, in which case the parents, to use a very simple case, if a child likes dinosaurs, then we help them find books about dinosaurs, or chemistry, or rockets, or volcanoes, or computers, or violins, or whatever it is they may be. but let's not try to decide how they are going to use that material.
That parent needs to be involved. Just because you're doing unschooling doesn't mean hands off. It means you get more involved. You need to be out, ready to get your hands dirty and take that path less traveled.
Facilitating our children's learning by bringing the world to them and them to the world without the constraints of a school building.
We're trying to show them how to learn for themselves and how to actually find their own goals and accomplish those goals.
Unschoolers have to go out and find their own resources or use tools that are found in our everyday lives. And that requires, some creative solutions at times. And it also requires some dedication to go out and find materials. And that's exciting and challenging.
If we reach our limits, we find help. So we're not alone. Of course, you're going to get support.
At our house, curiosity and creativity was not regulated or controlled. It was influenced and facilitated. And those are different things. When we weren't that inspired, which was quite often, we did nothing. We were allowed to just do nothing.
All the people I know who are involved in homeschooling, who are doing it well, devote a huge amount of time to it. They take it very seriously. They approach it rigorously. There are resources available to people who are committed to homeschooling. There are some great websites, some great associations, and the challenge, of course, is to provide a broadly based education which uses the expertise and skills of the students and the people doing the homeschooling, but brings in other talents and resources beyond that immediate group as well. And the internet, of course, makes that more and more possible.
Whether it's online or in person, whether there's an existing support group or whether you have to just meet a few moms at the park, make sure that you get hooked in.
If you've taken on the responsibility for teaching every single subject to every one of your kids, there's nothing wrong with outsourcing a little bit of that teaching workloads.
There are 11 members of staff employed by the school.
I spend a lot of time walking around and just seeing what's going on, so that if people need anything, they can find somebody and get the help that they're looking for.
Do they ever ask you any questions?
Oh, sure. Pretty much anything.
I try to help maintain the music rooms, show people where the door to the music room is, get them in there, and then I kind of stand back and let them get it themselves. This is a place where the teachers don't do it for you. There's no workbook to follow. It's really learning in the trenches, which more and more with the kind of new business and new possibilities out there, it's a great experience. It's a real experience.
I don't see any reason to treat children different from other people. My experience is that they're human beings just like everybody else. And to view a child, certainly after they become articulate and they can make some judgment, which is usually about 4 or 5, to view a child as any less competent to make decisions for themselves than adults, it's ridiculous.
I like Shakespeare. It's just really cool.
You're happy doing this by yourself rather than getting in a teacher?
Yeah. It's not that hard. I'm listening to it on YouTube, and I'm also reading it at the same time. It gives you sort of an idea of how you should say it.
What teachers can do sometimes, if a person wants a specific answer to a specific question, they can give them that. But the most of us in life, we go about learning things. I mean, you and I and anybody else really, if they think about their lives, they'll realize that most of what they got out of life, they've learned somehow on their own, and they found ways to find out what they want to know rather than have sitting in front of somebody who's telling them.
If current trends continue, learners will be taking much greater responsibility for their education. If predictions are correct, technology will emerge to support autonomy in learning at home, in school, or in the community.
My name is Ken, and I'm here to talk to you about
Personalisation and technology, two drivers for change which are coming together and creating the potential to revolutionise education for the next generation.
The Montessori approach embraces the needs of the unique child rather than the more typical group classroom model. With specialized learning materials and exploratory activities, your child is guided through a series of exercises and encouraged to work independently, following his or her own unique developmental path. This approach to academics promotes self-confidence, self-esteem, and self-motivation.
And Montessori was a very strong advocate of children having available to them materials that they would be able to use with their hands, that is to say, strictly manipulate.
Montessori designed sensory materials that embedded children's learning in the physical world. The exact models for the materials she designed over 100 years ago are still in use today.
In each classroom, children range in age by 2 to 3 years, allowing natural extended family relationships to develop. All of the teachers serve as guides, helping children develop confidence in their own abilities by responding to each child's individual needs.
The goal of Waldorf education is really to meet each child where they are and to give them a variety of experiences and academic and artistic experiences so that the learning becomes alive.
It's not just a job, it's really a way of finding yourself working with that child over time, teaching them in each of their centers. So have I touched their mind today? Have I touched their feelings? Have I engaged them, their will, their body? Have I gotten them to do something? Over time, I feel that if you meditate on the child and you are committed to opening their heart, then you can find any sort of solution that is necessary.
The Waldorf faculty holds the child at the center of their work. Every child is known in a Waldorf school. No child is hidden. The individual stands, the human being stands at the center of Waldorf education. It is the sole reason why Waldorf education exists.
This unfolding experience of leading the child into the world in a way that has patience about it, that has grace and space.
Well, we just don't have any support for kids with special needs, so we basically don't take kids who need special education. All children thrive in a small setting. They have a lot more parent involvement because parents have made a choice to send their children there.
Well, alternative schools, at least in my experience, have always been connected with social movements for equity, justice, racial justice, and economic justice.
Teachers have really been a lot of help. They really do a lot of individual support for each student.
The only reason the courses are great and work here is because the teachers put a lot of themselves into it. They're very unique courses and very unique people run them.
The life experiences that the teachers have bring a different life experience and like a different mentality to what each different course that they're teaching.
I don't feel stupid. I feel smart. I think Inglenook brings out the best in people.
It's just a lot more support based. Like in public school, you don't do your work, they give you an F. You don't do your work in alternative school, they ask you what's wrong, rather than why didn't you do this? I just found in general they're a lot more understanding.
They give you a lot more one-on-one help, and they have a lot less students to help, so you get more time to get help.
One of our goals those days was to show that public education can be made to be flexible enough to provide different ways of learning, different ways of relating to students, different kinds of curriculum, without destroying a public school system.
There is a terror that kids will feel good about things, simply be pleased with themselves and therefore not work hard. Most schools are not at all prepared to help kids feel good. Quite the contrary. There is such an emphasis on rigor and raising the bar and higher standards that we end up with a lot of kids who are alternately bored and anxious because the education really isn't about helping them to feel like proficient thinkers who love learning.
The schools that they have to work in are diametrically the opposite of the kind of environment that's necessary for people to really develop creativity and critical thinking.
The school should have been, ought to be, the family, not the factory, but it adopted the factory model and it's in love with it to this day.
Schooling is a form of adoption. You give your kid away at his or her most plastic years to a group of strangers. You accept a promise, sometimes stated and more often implied, that the state, to its agents, knows better how to raise your children and educate them than you, your neighbors, your grandparents, your local traditions do.
The number one priority is supporting learning for all. How do we create a rigorous, relevant, student-centered learning environment that better prepares all students for the 21st century? Technology is a big part of that. I've always said that technology is no longer an option, it's an essential tool for learning. Personal electronic devices can be used effectively in the classroom to better engage students in their learning.
We are accountable and that we are professionals all the time and that we have the best interests of their children at heart.
Lastly, how and to what extent is evaluation built into the model? Evaluation refers to judgment from another person, not to be confused with qualitative feedback, since feedback on its own can be constructive and constitute support. However, it's pretty hard to feel supported and in control if ultimately someone else will have the final word on what and how you've done. So, although in theory evaluation exists to help someone improve their creativity, effectively it does the opposite.
If kids feel like they're going to be punished, or the flip side, which is positive reinforcement, this ends up leading kids to feel less likely to feel a sense of ownership and pride in their own accomplishments.
You can't cure anything by punishment. If you're not prepared to be wrong, you will never come up with anything original. We stigmatize mistakes, and we're now running national education systems where mistakes are the worst thing you can make.
The more traditional and back to basics and test-oriented schooling is, the more kids lose interest in learning, the more superficial their thinking, and the more the gap grows between the haves and the have-nots.
We don't have metrics. These children don't get assessed regularly. So we don't know that the kids are learning what they need to master.
These kids aren't assessed. In other words, there are no tests.
Right.
How do we ever judge them and compare them to students their own age?
We were never tested, we were never graded. It might be the essence of self-education. You don't have to learn because you'll get in trouble or because you're going to fail a test. You have to learn because you want to, because there's something in you that wants to reach out and touch the world and want to communicate with it.
When I was 14, I took my ACT and I got a 26 on that. Then I got my GED. I got my Bachelor's of Fine Arts in theater, and I graduated magna cum laude with a 3.84 GPA. Last year I took the MAT and I scored in the 98th percentile, and I'm 2 weeks away from getting my master's, getting a 4.0. That's my educational background and my grades and test scores, which most people use as a standard of intelligence.
When it comes to assigning grades to my children's work, I do so for tests and quizzes. I use number grades, mainly percentages, rather than letter grades. So by the time my children take a math test, they have had a lot of opportunities to review, to practice, to become familiar and comfortable with the material, and they are familiar and comfortable by the time they take that test. So they know that the score I'm looking for in math is 95% and above.
If you want to do that and assign grades from the very earliest ages, you may, but it's not necessary to assign grades to your preschoolers, kindergartners, elementary school students, and even your middle schoolers. Of course, they are demonstrating competence to you in many different ways. There does come a time, however, and it's usually around high school, when parents need to start thinking about grades. 99% of the time, these students are going to need a transcript when they apply for colleges.
In order to convey to a college, how did you evaluate them? I wanted to look tough and cool and school-like. I was able to think of a million different ways that I had evaluated them. I had evaluated them on their classroom discussion, reading of the material, the different ways that they had written about the material. I graded them on whether or not they went to the field trip.
Sudbury Valley, what kind of school is it?
It's a ungraded private school.
This now is Dr. Dan Greenberg, the co-founder of the Sudbury Valley School in Framingham, Massachusetts, just west of Boston. That private school gives no tests, no homework, no grades, and all rules are made by the students. But it doesn't seem to be any discipline involved here.
No, on the contrary, the discipline comes from within. This is the discipline that you have with little children. It starts when they're born. It's a discipline of trying to grow up to be an effective adult. That's what we depend on. Nature provides kids with that automatically. What a kid tries to do more than anything else is to grow up and to be an effective adult.
A democratic school is first and foremost a place where a child doesn't have to feel threatened, feel comfortable and adequate and free.
At these Sudbury schools, you don't have some set subject you're learning, and you don't have some set amount of things you're supposed to learn about that subject. There's no way to grade somebody on a subject, and there's no reason to grade somebody on a subject.
From experience, I know that compulsory external evaluation often does a lot of harm and not much good. Usually a person knows themselves best, and someone comes and every day tells them, you're not very good at math, doesn't necessarily mean they're not good at math, but it does mean that they may now think that they're not good at math.
Consider the absurdity of grades and testing. If you go to a library, they assume that you want to learn something, and it's your business. They do not make you sit down and test and grade you on the way out. Why should school be different? It's amazing, actually, that the whole mania about testing is the opposite of the learner-centered approach that we believe in.
Conventional schools assume children need incentives for learning. Gold stars, A's, honor roll ribbons, popcorn parties. If they don't respond, they must be dealt punishments, bad grades, trips to the principal's office, etc. Montessori schools assume the opposite. Children do not need to be forced to learn. Montessori does all this with no grades, no tests, no homework.
You teach by teaching, not by correcting.
Building assessment rather right into the sensory materials. Normally, right, when we have children doing things in traditional schools, the children work on a project. The project is passed off to a teacher. The teacher marks what the student did correctly and incorrectly, and then the feedback is given back to the students. What Montessori emphasizes as much as possible is taking the teacher out of the assessment equation. The materials themselves enable the child to assess whether he is doing them correctly or incorrectly. It is obvious to the child perceptually. So the point here is that we want to be teaching students to have their own independent judgment as opposed to being required to depend on teachers telling them whether they got things right or wrong.
Artistic activity and the development of the imagination are hugely important in Steiner schools, where high standards are achieved through encouragement, not pressure, through finding the joy in learning, not through testing. At no stage are the students continually tested in any subject or made to compete against each other for attention or prestige. This is all part of the Steiner ethos too, which holds that a less pressurised childhood will help to develop a healthy, capable and well-balanced adult.
The competition isn't with the other person, the competition's with themselves. And because of that, it makes them very dynamic, very powerful people who have very strong sense of direction. They're quite capable of leading, they're quite capable of taking on responsibility.
You do have to audition, and there's other high schools where you have to write an essay to get in. So they are, for all intents and purposes, a kind of a charter school.
Everybody there was extremely concerned about grades. As a kid who does not excel in academics necessarily, it was not my kind of place. It was so competitive. Everyone was so stressed out.
How do kids do academically, Chris?
Well, we find that students who and parents who prefer the alternative setting, based on the feedback we've received, tends to do very well.
EQAO provides the data with regards to achievement. And if we can use EQAO to help inform our practice and our teachers' practice about seeing the particular needs and individualities of students, their strengths and their weaknesses, if you will, we have a better chance at communicating with the students and building that relationship, which is so crucial in that teacher learning strategy.
If education is the key, then school is the lock. Because it rarely ever develops your mind to the point where it can perceive red as green and continue to go when someone else said stop. Because as long as you follow the rules and pass the exams, you're cool. But are you aware that examiners have a checklist? And if your answer is something outside of the box, the automatic response is a cross.
According to schools, art isn't a means for expression and experimentation anymore. When we put so many restrictions on something as free as art, we don't bother using our creativity, and we just do whatever it takes to get a good grade on the project. This lack of innovation isn't going to help us later in life.
When we involve students in the classroom assessment process, when we increase the amount of specific descriptive feedback they receive during the learning, and when we decrease the amount of evaluative feedback, students learn more.
We have something called MCAS at the end of the year. And the whole year, the whole year, they just learn about the stuff they need to learn about for MCAS. Then once they take the MCAS, they're rated. And if you fail at MCAS, you're considered not smart, even though you've been learning about everything the whole entire year.
children themselves begin to feel like the whole purpose of life is to outperform others in school.
And making young children take standardized tests and giving them grades and so on are all justified based on the theory that says people are going to do unpleasant things to you later, so we'd better make you suffer now to prepare you. And of course, it's ludicrous, it's almost laughable, except that it's so sad, and that's exactly what's going on in much of the country.
So which educational models serve creativity best? Which model relinquishes control to the learner, provides support in all its manifestations, and revokes evaluation? And which models don't? These conclusions are left up to you and I, and so are the actions we take as a result.
The mainstream has rocketed away on these rails of conformity, and I think it's time to make the alternative into the mainstream.
I want to see teachers becoming really interested in freedom for the child. I want people to be wide and broad in dealing with children. It will come, it's coming slowly.
When it comes to which educational model nurtures creativity best, the choice is really an individual one. Everyone has to make their own informed decision for themselves, and will base this on their unique thought processes and life experience. It's worth noting that what someone may personally believe to be the most effective model for nurturing creativity may not be the same model they believe is best overall. It's possible that a model that appears to foster creativity very well could, in someone's opinion, simultaneously have major downfalls. For example, it may cost a lot of money, meaning few could afford it. Or you may not see any particular model as being exemplary on the whole, but you might see important bits and pieces throughout the various models that can be adapted to create a customized education for best fit.
The idea that huge systems can be somehow manipulated, organized to please everybody or almost everybody just leads to endless quarrels about what is to be done, what is not to be done.
What I think has to become clear on a wide scale, however, is that the mainstream system, the system that most students belong to, needs some major changes if it's to truly foster the development of creative thinkers, and all of the potential wrapped into that. Some say that change is not the right word, that overhaul and revolution are terms more fitting.
Reform is no use anymore, because that's simply improving a broken model. What we need is not evolution, but a revolution in education. This has to be transformed into something else. It's about creating a movement in education in which people develop their own solutions, but with external support based on a personalized curriculum.
This calls up the creative process once again. When something's not quite right, it's important that we formalize a critique and fix what needs fixing. After all, education is an art, and if we created it, then we can recreate it. We tell our kids, you can do anything you set your mind to. If we believe that's honestly the truth, then here and now is the time to model that for them. By individually and collectively assuming the duty of rethinking, recalibrating, redesigning, and revolutionizing our education system so that they really can do anything they set their mind to, with our support. History tells us it's not going to change itself. History tells us that people can successfully change the world when they try.
Paulo taught us that education is always political, and teachers are unavoidably political operatives. Teaching is a political act. Teachers should embrace this dimension of their work.
So if you agree that the status quo has got to go, then it's on you and you and you and you and I to do something to start changing motion. What will you do? At the very least, you could add a comment, tell a friend, post this somewhere, record your own video, join the conversation. You can disagree with me if you want to, I can take it. The important thing is that we're talking about it, and wherever that leads us.
My philosophical conviction is that we did not come to keep the world as it is. We came to the world in order to remake the world. We have to change reality.
My imagination. Give me the my imagination. Give me the my imagination. Give me the my
Come along, children. Now we're going to have a little music, like old times.
Give me the my imagination. Give me the my imagination. Give me the my imagination. Give me the my imagination.
I think one of the things that can be done is the development of videos take the abstractions that an Elliot Eisner talks about and makes them more concrete, more vivid, more actual. And that has to be followed up with conversations, but initially it could be presented as the kind of teaching and learning human experience that matters from an aesthetic perspective.
My